A great technique for coming up with lots of ideas for conceptual imagery is to use what's called the forced connections technique. To do this, you first have to come up with a bunch of words related to your project. So here I'm using mind mapping to brainstorm a bunch of ideas. I'm doing a poster for the band Bright Eyes, so I've put Bright Eyes in the middle, and then I've drawn some nodes off from Bright Eyes that are the words that are most closely related to the band. So the words eyes and the words bright, indie rock, which is their category, the word music, San Diego, which is the location where they're playing the concert, and Nebraska, which is the state that they're from. And then from each one of those main nodes, I've drawn a bunch of words that are related to that word. So you can see that in a very short amount of time, I've come up with a bunch of words that are either directly related to Bright Eyes or a little bit indirectly related. And this can go on as long as you want. So if you want to keep branching off from these subwords, you can do that to come up with a lot of ideas. After you come up with a list, this is where you start to force the connections between the words. So for example, we have the word eye and the word sunset, and here I've drawn a really simple sketch connecting those two words, where the eye has taken the place of the sun in a sunset scene, where it's dipping below the horizon line, and there are these rays of light that are, showing the brightness of that sun. Here's another example between the word eye and the word guitar, where I've used an acoustic guitar and placed an eye where there normally would be the hole in the acoustic guitar. So this is another really simple example of forcing the connections between those words. Obviously, some words will work better than others, so you just have to come up with a bunch of ideas and start trying stuff out. The sketching phase is really just about thinking through your ideas. So don't feel like the sketch has to be amazing. It's just something simple to try things out and see if the connection works. So I've pulled up Illustrator here and I've created a new document that is in 17 by 11 format, which is the size that is correct for the poster. I've also pulled my sketch in of the force connection that I decided to use, which is the guitar combined with the eye. So to use this sketch, I'm first going to create a guitar shape. So I've pulled a guitar off of the internet and I'm just going to place it into my Illustrator document. Let's rotate it so it's the right way around. And this will just help us come up with the guitar shape. Tracing photos is a really good thing to do in certain situations, especially one like this where you're just looking to get the iconic shape of the guitar. In situations where you have something really detailed that isn't so shapely, it might not be good to trace photographs because you'll end up with too much detail. So in those cases, sometimes you want to take a more interpretive approach. But in this case, I just want to make sure I'm getting that really simple, iconic guitar shape. So I'm going to just take my pen tool and start tracing this shape. And I'm just going to start by getting the basic shape down, and then I can go back and make sure that everything's perfect. Okay, so that's not quite right, but we're going to swing back around and fix it in just a second. So I'm going to turn off my... I'm going to go ahead and show all swatches. I'm going to turn off my fill color and put on a stroke color instead, just so I can see what I'm doing. Then I'm going to zoom in here and just make sure that my guitar tracing is a little bit better. So I'm going to pull out this handle, just go through and just kind of fix the tracing that I just did. And I'm using the direct select tool to just grab these individual points so I can fix the overall shape. And if you draw things using vertical handles and you put your points in the right place, which should always be at the extrema of the shape, then you shouldn't have too much of an issue getting the shape to be correct. It actually gets much harder if you don't stick to those principles, because then things can get a little bit complicated. Alright, there we go. That looks good. I'm also just going to draw in really quickly the shape of this neck as well. So let's draw that in. And I won't use this whole neck, but I'll still trace it out. Alright, there we go. And then I'll do the same for this little piece of wood here. I'm not even sure what that's called, but just create a little rectangle for that. Okay, so now we kind of have the basic shape. I'm going to move my guitar away because I don't really need it anymore. So the basic idea here is we're going to create an eye and put it in the place of where this hole normally is in the guitar. So let's go ahead and create an eye shape. A good way to do this is just to take the intersection between two overlapping circles. So I'm going to create a circle, create a copy of it, and then select both of them, and then using the Pathfinder tools, use the intersect option to create just that inner shape. Then if I zoom in, I can use the ellipse tool, and I'll put that right at the center of the object, and then hold down Option and Shift. Shift will constrain it to a circle. Option will make it so that the shape grows from the inside out. That way I can get it nicely centered in that area. And then I'll just create another shape inside of that as well. So I'm going to do the same thing and create a second shape. So there's a basic eye shape. Okay, so that can be pulled into the guitar. And we'll scale it down to about the right size. Okay, so now we're starting to construct this illustration. One thing that we're going to need to do is get this neck out of the way. I don't really like how it's coming all the way down because it's almost just kind of interfering with the eye. So maybe I'll actually bring the neck up back to the top, and I'll actually use Command Shift and open bracket to set it behind this shape so that when I put fills in the shape, it'll just be underneath. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the color theme tool. If you don't have the color theme tool, you can always get to it through Window and down to Color Themes. And I'm just going to find a color theme that I like. In this case, I'll use this monotone palette at the top here. I think this is really cool. Monotone palettes often have a really simplified look that is really streamlined, and so it's a really good way to go. I'm just going to work with this one, so I'll add that to my swatches and then collapse that down. And remember, you can always modify these color palettes to whatever you want. It's sometimes just a good starting point to start with some sort of color palette. Okay, so let's go ahead and start constructing our guitar. I'm going to get rid of the stroke, and then I'll fill the guitar with, I'll use the kind of medium color. For the neck, maybe I'll go down one shade. Okay, and then the eye is supposed to symbolize a hole, so I want the center of the hole to probably be the darkest color. Once again, I'm going to get rid of that stroke. I'll go the darkest color on that, and then maybe one shade up on the inside. And then for this outside shape, again, get rid of that stroke, and then I'll go one shade up again. There we go. And then this one, I guess I'll also go a little bit darker on that. Alright. Cool. So now I got to put some strings in here, and I think it's best for the strings to just come right over the top of the eye. So I'm just going to use the line tool, and I'll draw the strings from the top down to this board. There we go. And I'll give that some stroke weight. And let's make that the lightest color in our palette. Okay, and then most guitars have 6 strings, so I'm just going to go ahead and copy this by holding down Command. I'm going to hold down Shift so it goes straight over. I'm going to move it over a little bit, and then use Command D to step and repeat and create 6 strings. There we go. And then those are a little bit too close together. So what I'll do is I'll select all of them, and I'll use the nudge tools to move them apart. So I'm going to hit Shift arrow. That's actually a little bit too much. So I'm just going to use the regular arrow instead of Shift. I'm going to nudge it over a few times. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to deselect this one. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And so I'm basically doing 4 nudges between each to make sure that they're evenly spaced out. Okay, so that spacing looks a little bit better. Can also just select them and move them apart. We'll get it kind of centered on that neck. Just a little bit further apart. There we go. Cool. So there's already something pretty cool and conceptual starting to happen. Another thing we have to consider is how to place this guitar in the overall composition. And one of the techniques with creating a simplified illustration is to crop it in some way that simplifies it even more. We want the guitar to be recognizable, so we want to make sure we have enough of the guitar where you can see what it is, but a little bit of cropping can actually make this even more interesting. So let's go ahead and blow it up and see what we can do. So one possibility is maybe to put it off to the side, where we sort of have this one side, but the other side gets chopped off. So if we wanted to see what that looks like, we can always draw a rectangle on top of this shape. And then if we select everything, including that rectangle, we can create a clipping mask by right-clicking or control-clicking and going down to Make Clipping Mask. So again, that top shape will act as a container for everything underneath. So when I make a clipping mask, it will stop showing everything that's outside of that rectangle. So that gives us a pretty good preview on what this crop will look like. And I think that that's a pretty cool crop. Let's try another one. So I'm going to undo that clipping mask, undo the creation of that rectangle. Let's try one where it's just kind of like down here, sort of centered. I'm going to make it a little bit larger and bring it up. There we go. I think that's pretty cool too. I'm going to make it just a tiny bit bigger. And then bring it up. I don't want to make it so big because I want to see these sides, because again, that's the iconic part of the guitar shape. So it's important that I see that so I can identify it as a guitar. So let's go ahead and try that. That looks good. And we'll go ahead and clip it at the end. So a couple other modifications I want to make. One is that this doesn't look centered anymore. Something kind of went wrong here. So I'm going to make sure that this is all nice and tidy. Okay, so I'm going to center these on the middle of the guitar string. So it should be right in between the third and fourth string. Same with this one. Get that all centered up. All right, cool. And then I think that a little bit more contrast with this eye would actually help. So even though this is not strictly part of the palette, I'm going to modify this color a little bit. So I can either do that with the color picker, or if I shift click on this swatch, I can double click on the color picker here and bring it up in the same way. I'm just going to make that a little bit darker. So I'm just going to drag it a little bit more towards the black. And you can see that this is the original color and this is the new color. So if you want to see a before and after, that's a good way to look at that. Okay, so make that a little bit darker just to make that center circle stand out, because I want it to start to really reference what's happening over here. There's also a little bit of detail down here, and this is kind of up to you whether to include this kind of detail. I think I'll put it in just because I don't like how these strings are just kind of ending on nothing. Okay, so I'm just going to put in a little bit of a strip here just to kind of contain those strings. There we go. Okay, cool. So this is looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and put a background color into this. So I'm going to put a rectangle, and I'll send that to the back by hitting Shift, Command, and open bracket, so that now that's going behind everything else. And I kind of like the dark color. Let's see what it looks like with the light color. Close call. I think the light color for me is a little bit better. Alright, so that looks good. We could also put in these horizontal lines on the fretboard. Let's go ahead and try that and make a decision about whether we want to keep it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put this in, and then let's just give it a little bit darker than the fretboard itself. Kind of like that. I guess we have to go one more shade. There we go. Okay, but we want the strings to go over this, so we'll fix that in a second. But for now, let's just kind of make a copy and then we can use Command D to step and repeat that up. There we go. And then we'll go ahead and select our strings. So I'm going to select everything, and then I'm going to hold down Shift to deselect that fretboard. So now I have just the string selected, and now I can hit Command Shift and close bracket to bring that to the front. And remember, that's the same hotkey as going up to Object and Arrange, Bring to Front. So you can see that hotkey there. So that's just going to put those lines in front of the fretboard lines. Okay, cool. And these are sticking out a little bit, so you could go ahead and clean those up. I'm just going to leave it for now, just to keep this quick. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and add our crop in there. So I'm going to create another rectangle. Again, this is going to be used as the container for our clipping mask. So I'm going to create that, and then I'll select everything, and then right-click and go to Make Clipping Mask to contain everything down. So I think this is working pretty well. I can still tell that it's a guitar. The eye is definitely coming through. It looks a little bit creepy, which I think is a good thing. We also need some room for our text. And I think in this case, the text coming down at the bottom is a good choice. So maybe what I'll do is move this thing up a little bit to make a little bit more room for that text. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and double click in here. That's going to put me into isolation mode so that I can edit what's inside of that clipping mask. And then I'm just going to select the things that I want to move up. So I want to move up this piece, and then the 6 strings. So I'm going to shift click and select all 6 of those. And then I'm just going to hit shift and up to nudge it a little bit higher. There we go. So that'll just give me a little bit more space. It still looks like a guitar, so I think that's fine. Maybe I'll bring it a little bit down. There we go. All right. And then let's go ahead and put in our text. In this case, we want to write the name of our band, Bright Eyes. Okay, so I'm going to just click to create point type. Then I can resize that. And then let's go ahead and find a good font for this. And I think something like Festivo will be a good choice. This is a kind of condensed display font that has a little bit of grunginess to it, so I think it could work well in this situation. And there's a bunch of different styles, so I'm just going to choose this style, which is, again, just a little bit grungy. All right, there we go. So that can just sit right there. And let's just choose the lighter color for that from our palette. And I think we need to make it even a little bit lighter just so it really stands out. So let's go into our palette and really up it so it's almost a white. There we go. So now that's really visible. And then there's a few other pieces of information that I want to include in this for my concert. So I could either put that kind of underneath the text. I think that's a pretty good choice. Let's go ahead and try that. So I'm going to move this text up. Then I'll create some new point type. Okay, so this is going to be October 22, 2018. That's one piece of text that we need. I'm going to make that a little bit bigger. And I think I like the Festivo for that. Maybe we'll go ahead and make this dark just to kind of contrast the other type. Okay, and I like a lot of scale difference. So, you know, a lot of contrast between your typography is a really good thing. So don't be afraid to make, you know, this information much smaller than, you know, other pieces. And then I'm going to put in the observatory, because that's the venue for the event. Okay, so that's a pretty simple, effective poster. I'm not totally sure about this gap in here. Maybe this wants to come over there, or maybe it wants to all come towards the middle. Another possibility is we can play around with some other placements of that text. So one thing I'm thinking is it could live sort of on the edge of this eye. So let's go ahead and make a copy of this poster. I'm going to go ahead and move my sketch over. And again, it's always good to make a copy because then you can compare the two different versions. So I'll make a copy and then delete these, bring this down a little bit. And then this time I'm going to put the type on the eye to do a type on a path. Make the eye a little bit bigger, so I'm going to double click to enter isolation mode for that clipping mask. Select the three components of that eye and just make it a little bit bigger. There we go. And maybe the outer eye I'll make a little smaller. There we go. So that center eye is really large. Okay, so to do type on a path, basically any kind of vector shape can make that work. What I'm going to do is I'm going to, again, double click to enter the isolation mode for this clipping mask. And I want to make a copy of this shape because one of the shapes I want to use as the eye itself, and then the other shape I'm going to use as the shape to direct the typography. So what I'm going to do is select that outer shape and go to copy, and then I'm going to go to paste in place. Okay, so now I have a second version on top of everything else, and this is the one that I'm going to use for the type. So I'm going to go to the type tool, and if you want to type on a path, all you have to do is hold down Option, and when I press Option, you can see that the cursor changes a little bit. There's a little bit of a wavy line next to the type tool. That is telling me that this is going to be type on a path. So it's going to put the type on that path. So it happens when I go over the edge of that shape. So when I click there, you'll see that the type, the filler type, goes all the way around the edge. Okay, so now I can type in my information, October 22nd, 2018. Let me zoom in there. Cool. October. Let's make that a little bit bigger. And we'll go to the darker color. There we go. All right. And then let's also make the shape a little bigger because I don't want it to be right on the eye. I kind of want it to be a little bit above. So I'm just going to hold down Shift and hold down Option to make it grow from the inside out, just to make it just a tiny bit bigger. Oops, that wasn't the right one. So I'm going to go back to the text and then do it on that one. There we go, just to make that grow a little bit. And then to put the text over here for the observatory, I could make a separate shape, but I think I'm going to cheat and just go with this same shape, put some spaces in here, and do the same. Observatory. There we go, so I can get that nicely centered. Okay, so there's a second option for the placement of that text. And I think this is a little bit more engaging. The text is maybe just a tiny bit distracting, so I could play with some different weights of this. Maybe it's a different style of Festivo that is a little lighter, like this one here, for instance. Okay, so maybe that'll be a little bit less distracting, but I think the general idea for this poster is coming along nicely. So this would be great for a rough draft. And in the next phase, I can, work on this poster a little bit more and get some of that refinement into it.